days. The rest of us can turn to Ephesians chapter 2. Ephesians chapter 2. There's too much that depends on my right ear in the way that this works. We have been talking on Sunday evenings about discipleship, and we started talking about discipleship in terms of Jesus as Lord. We talked about the declaration that we make as we are a people who are on the path to discipleship. And then we talked about the fact that early on there was a conflict in terms of worldviews between is Jesus Lord or is Caesar Lord? And how does that work and how did that work? And while Christians are called to obey government authorities and to be respectful to that, and really to do that in a way that goes beyond, I think, what we think about. I remember as we started 1 Peter, and we talked about what does it mean to respect government authorities. And Peter will write and said, pray for the emperor. Be obedient in all things that you can be obedient in. And he wasn't talking about a Roman emperor that was just sort of, I don't know about Christianity. He was talking about Nero, who burned Christians alive. And he was talking about Nero, who actively persecuted the church in Rome and persecuted those who were believers. And so to stand up and say Jesus is Lord was to face persecution. To give unto Caesar what is Caesar, but to give unto God what is God's, was a serious conflict. But disciples have always understood that Jesus is Lord. And to engage that, we talked about the process of discipleship. And then we talked about the fact that in terms of Jesus Lord, does God work? Is what God gives us enough to live in this life, to understand godliness? That Christianity does not seek to have an influence in the world in the way that the world has influence. That Christianity is not a government movement. It's not a military movement. It's not an educational movement in the sense of the word that we deal with what the world's powers are. That the church has always been about doing the work of God in the world, and that our impact and our influence comes person by person and change life by change life as hearts are there. Does God's way work? It does work. And so in defining discipleship, we talked about gaining a clarity of identity and of action, knowing who we are and what it is God calls us to be. To follow that up, we began to talk about what it is that disciples believe. And we started talking about the fact that disciples believe the gospel, that the gospel is a life-changing moment, that the understanding that the story of Jesus is the story of discipleship, where it defines for us how we live and where we walk and what we do. It defines how our life is ordered and what it is that goes on. We talked last time we were together about the fact that disciples believe the Savior, that Jesus not only is, but that Jesus does, that we believe what He says. That when He says, this is the message that we carry out, that message is effective, that message works, that when Jesus says, this is the way that we live, that lifestyle is what has an impact in the world. We believe what Jesus says. When He says, come to me, all you who are weary and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest, then we believe that rest is found in Jesus, right? We believe that Jesus invites us to come. When Jesus says, I came not to be served, but to serve, we believe that what He did on the face of this earth was not to come to be acclaimed, and did not come to be lifted up into some sort of worldly way, but that He came to serve humanity. We believe what it is that Jesus says, and as disciples, believing what Jesus says means that we walk where Jesus walked, and we conform not to this world, but we conform to the person of Jesus and to the lifestyle of Jesus and to the character that Jesus presents, and that this makes us different than the world. And what we've talked about so far has, in all aspects, been highlighting the fact that we are different than the world that we live in, and that discipleship calls us to be different, calls us to be distinct, calls us to be unique in the sense of what the world seeks. Not unique in the sense that we all sort of have our own definition, To look like Jesus continues to be the defining characteristic of a disciple. To have a lifestyle that imitates who Christ is and what Christ does, that reflects His nature and character in the world, continues to be the calling definition for disciples. When we talk about our identity, we talk about our action, it still rests in Jesus. Let your light shine before men so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father who is in heaven. That the way that we live is a lifestyle that is so transparently Christ-like, that so specifically points to Jesus, that when folks see what we do, when they see how we serve, when they see our belief in action, they glorify God because they see God as the source of all that takes place there. They see God as the source of what it is that we do in those areas. We do a lot of things here as a church. And so our question tonight becomes, is the church the same, in sort of the same vein? What is the church? Because disciples believe that the church has importance. They believe the church has something fundamental. They believe the church is given by God and is for us, is for our benefit, is for our encouragement, is for the building up of who we are. And so tonight, as we look at the fact that disciples believe the church, we're going to turn our attention to Ephesians chapter 2 and look at just 3 or 4 verses tonight, where Paul is writing about what the church is and about what the church believes and what we need to understand about the church. Now, in Ephesians chapter 2, way back in verse 11, it says, "Therefore, remember that at one time you Gentiles in the flesh called the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision, which is made in the flesh by hands. Remember that you were at that time separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world." He begins to say, what we once were, we are no longer. What we once were, we are not now. That the difference between being out in the world and being in the church, the difference between someone who is the disciple of Jesus and someone who is not, is a relationship with Jesus. Is a relationship that God offers us, that God has moved in history and in time to give to us. That God has, in His wisdom, looked at us and said, I want a relationship with mankind. I want a relationship with you. I want you to be my disciple. And Paul says, I remember a time when I followed the law. And I remember a time when I was a Jew who was practicing. And I remember what it was to look at a Gentile and to see someone who was uncircumcised and to see someone who was outside of God's people and to see someone who was without hope. But see, Paul doesn't see the Gentiles in that way any longer. Paul doesn't see the people that he walks next to through the lens of Judaism, through the lens of a Pharisee, through the lens of someone who is intent on that. He says, I want you to remember that that's what you once were, but I want you to remember that that's not what you are now. That you are a part of something that God has always designed you to be a part of. That God has designed man with the need to be a part of something more. And what God has provided in that place is, one, a relationship with Himself, and two, the church. That the church is something that is vital. That in a conversation of today, the church is something that is essential. We have that conversation in the moment, and it's funny how that sort of highlights that, to say the church is essential in that way. I think it brings to mind a lot of things that I'm not sure that Paul is necessarily approaching, but it is a part of our conversation. He says, but I want you to remember that you are part of something that is bigger now, that you are part of something that God has given you now. And as being part of the church, there are things that we believe about the church. There are things that we believe in because we are part of the church. There are things that we believe that the church is and that the church does. And that belief grows up out of the fact that the church is the people of God. If in my lifetime I was to have to define what the church is, I will be honest that has changed from time to time. That I think early on, an understanding of what the church is, when I was young, was it was the place that we go on Sunday mornings because our parents made us go. It was the place where we learned Bible stories about God, and we learned to be good. And we learned to be civilized. Now, I teach that to my children, that you will be civilized if I have to kill you to get you there. Okay? That you are not going to be rude, and you're going to share, and you're going to be kind, and you're going to be good, and you're going to be like Jesus, who was a civilized individual. And we have that conversation in my house, and we have it more regularly now than we had it 10 years ago. I'm just telling you, difference in children and behaviors. But we have that conversation, and there was a time when that's what I understood church to be. Church was the place where you went and you were quiet because you learned things about respect, you learned things about... But that's because at that point in time, that's what I could understand and what I could see. There was so much more even in that moment that the church was, that we were learning whether we knew it or not. As I grew up, the church became something more than that. That the church became a place where my friends were. The church became a place that God had provided to give us good friends who were good examples, who were friends that would not get us in trouble, who were friends who would not get us in the wrong path, the friends who would not get us... Now, that didn't last very long because then I got to high school, and those are the friends I got in trouble with. But for a while, it was an understanding that that was kind of the approved group in my life of friends and of people and of... that still went along with teaching, because you went there and they taught you how to be friends with other folks. And they taught you how to be... I think for a while, the church in my life was a place where there were a lot of rules that you had to learn. But I think that's part of growing up too, and understanding that. And then as I got on into college and got on into figuring out for myself what it was, you begin to run into a variety of descriptors. Church is a hospital for those who are sick. Jesus came because man was sick and needed a healer. That the church is in some ways a social group, that it provides us with a place to have conversations and to explore faith in ways that you can't do anywhere else. That church is meant to be sort of this shot in the arm, a place where you go to get what you need to make it through the rest of the week. That church is a community of God. And I think that as I have grown and as I get older and that definition deepens, I'm not sure that any part of that definition is wrong, or any part of that definition has left me. I think that maturity continues to show me what the church is supposed to be and how the church affects us in a variety of different areas of our life or in a variety of different stages of our life. And more I see church as a place, as a community that God gives us, where we are together called to work out what faith is. That we are together called to see what it means to live this with God life, this life that looks like Jesus, that we are meant to bounce ideas and to live through hard times and to have discussions and to study together because we grow in that way. And so church becomes in and of itself a place where we come together in order to grow, to look like Jesus. And in my life now, I think that is probably the best definition of what a church is. But it's not the only definition of what a church is. That we can look at what the church is and find a variety of descriptors in the Bible. And Paul, I think, helps us to see that in Ephesians chapter 2, because he starts in 19 and says, "Since you are not what you were, what are you?" And so in verse 18 he says, "For through him we both have access in one Spirit to the Father." And so he begins this life together. We have access. You're not in the world anymore. You've come and you have this relationship with God. You have this relationship through Christ with God. Verse 19, "So then, you are no longer strangers and aliens." And remember, he's writing this to the same Gentile people that once he thought were exactly that. Strangers to God and aliens from salvation. Aliens to faith. Foreigners outside of God's chosen people. He says that's not what you are any longer. You are no longer aliens and strangers, but you are fellow citizens with the saints. And so I think the first thing that Paul wants us to understand is that Disciples believe that the church is a group of fellow citizens. We think about citizenship, and oftentimes we think about, I think, sort of patriotic sort of things, that I am a citizen of the United States, and as a citizen of the United States, that entitles me to certain rights, and to certain benefits, and to certain protections. It calls me to certain feelings, and to certain beliefs. It calls me to participate in this place where I have responsibilities. And we think about this idea of citizenship, and Paul draws on the picture of citizenship. And he does it in a variety of places. I love Philippians when he talks about citizenship, because he says, I want you to remember that your citizenship is not here, your citizenship is in heaven. And in Philippi, they understood that their citizenship was not due to Philippi and Asia Minor, but that their citizenship rested in Rome as Roman citizens. And Paul says, your citizenship is in heaven, but here he says, your citizenship is a shared citizenship. The church is a group of people who, by the nature of our rebirth, bring us into a very specific place. See, I was born an American, and that gives me certain rights, certain privileges, certain responsibilities. I was born a Texan, which makes that even better, right? That's the way. But the reality is that at baptism, when I was born into Christ, I obtained a citizenship that brings with it rights and privileges and responsibilities. That it brings with it, in this relationship with Jesus, some automatic things that we do and some automatic things that we say. Is the church a place where we are concerned about doctrine and concerned about doing church right and concerned about the form and the function of what we do? It is a place where we worry about those things. It is a place where we want to get those things right. As fellow citizens, those are things that define boundaries and define the character of God and define what it is that God does in our worship times and what God does. And I think it's important for us to remember that. But that's not all that the church is. See, church is not simply a place that I come because I belong to the church and so I can sneak in, sit down, participate for a little bit, and sneak out and be done. Okay? That church goes beyond simply a matter of I am a member. When I got to Abilene Christian University in 1988, I remember sitting with a group of folks, and it was already a group that in the first couple of weeks we had bonded together. And at some point in time, we had reached this agreement that we were all going to place membership at the same church because we wanted to go to church together. And there were about 8 of us. And we're going to place membership at the same church. And so we got to look for a church, and this is what we're going to look for. And of course, you know, you're 18 years old, and you're trying to figure out how to choose a church. But I can remember that in the middle of that discussion, as we talk about placing membership, we're going to place membership because we belong, we're going to place membership, we're going to place membership. One of the girls in the group said, y'all are all stupid. You can't place membership at a church. And I went, what? You crazy girl. You got to place membership at a church. She goes, no, I am a member of every church of Christ in the world because I was baptized. That's when I placed membership. I'm not placing membership anywhere else. And I can remember going back and forth about, oh no, you got to go down front. You got to go down in the front and you got to tell the preacher, we are going to be here, and the elders have to know that you're going to be responsible to. She goes, no, I told Jesus that's what I was going to be at the beginning. I'm not going to have that. I understand universal membership. And it's hilarious how that comes up. Because I just always kind of thought that this was the way that you did it. The reality is, in some ways, she's right. At baptism, we become citizens of the church. And we belong to every other Christian that there is. And we belong to every church that there is because of that citizenship. The reality is we attend a specific congregation, and that's a little bit different than just having sort of a universal membership, of just simply being a citizen, isn't it? See, Paul goes on to talk when he says here, I've lost my place. In verse 19, so then you are no longer alien strangers, you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. So Paul talks about what it means to be family. Paul talks about what it means to be intimate. That citizenship is fine, but because I am a citizen, it's different than being the member of a household. See, I have rights and responsibilities and privileges and all those things in a family too, depending on where I'm at. My rights and my privileges and my responsibilities are different. I am the oldest one in my family. I am the daddy, which means I get to stay up the latest, unless mom wants to. But I'm the daddy, so I get a later bedtime than my children, if I want it. On the weekends, I don't want it. We let Walker do that. He can put himself to bed now. But I have responsibilities to who they are and what they do. But those responsibilities don't flow from citizenship. They don't flow from a title. They don't flow from a position. They flow from an intimacy that we share as a family. They flow from a connection that is deeper and is different. And so while there are household rules that have to be kept, as a family, I'm much more concerned about nurturing. I'm much more concerned about growing. I'm much more concerned about investment. I'm much more concerned with implanting what it is that they need in their lives to grow. I'm much more about being rooted in the right places. That it goes beyond doctrinal accuracy into an ability to reflect who they are in Jesus Christ. That our relationship differs. In the church, it's the same way. I am a fellow citizen with every Christian that walks the face of the earth, but I am a member at the Spring Creek Church of Christ. And while I share family ties with a lot of places, just because we've lived a lot of places, my most intimate ties at this point in my life are with this place. And my draw to be responsible to you is much more than my draw to be responsible to somebody else. People call and say, "Will you come?" And no, I will not. Because I'm going to be at Spring Creek. Now, part of that's because I get a paycheck here. I get that. But that's not the driving force. I'm allowed a lot more time off than I take. Why am I here? Because I love you. This is the place of investment. This is the first place that we are. We don't miss ball games when Walker plays, and we don't miss church here when we don't have to. We come and we are a part of who we are. And the reason for those two things is the same. That we are members of the household of God, and we are members here together. And the church becomes a family that has this love that flows between individuals, this intimacy that we share, where you are a part of my day-to-day life, that you are a part of the decisions that I make at Walmart and in my neighborhood. Just the same as Robin and Walker and Carson, you have an influence and you have an effect in that place. And disciples believe that they are members of the household of God, that they have an intimacy that is God-given, a family that goes beyond the folks that live within the four walls of your address. That we have a relationship that we share here that's as vital as any relationship that we share anywhere else. That's as essential as any relationship that we have. And that we will overcome barriers to be together, that we will overcome barriers to be involved, that we will overcome barriers to be connected. In a time of masks and social distancing and all of the stuff that goes with COVID, there are discussions to be had, but the underlying question is, what does it take for me to be with you? And am I willing to do that? Am I willing to learn new technology to join you online? Am I willing to give of myself to be with you? Am I willing? Those are questions that the church has always had to answer in one way or another. At the same time at Abilene, we're having discussions about placing membership. I am finding how easy it is with no one around me to sleep in on Sunday mornings. That now all of a sudden it becomes a decision I have to make. Is church important enough for me to get up for? Will I give away 2 hours of sleep as a college student who stays up way too late and does way too much in order to make that a priority, to be there? Will I plan my schedule around that? Will I give of my time and my effort? Those are the questions that we ask for family. Those are the questions that we deal with when we talk about investment. Those are the questions we deal with when we talk about what it is to be a church. Verse 20. Built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone. That disciples believe that the church is founded on Jesus. And so now it goes beyond even this idea of family to talk about this idea of intimacy with Jesus. The church is founded on who Jesus is, and it becomes a personal call in our lives. See, we believe that the church is the place where we understand what it is to be Christ-like. That it's founded on the apostles, and those are teaching places. That the church has a personal effect. That the church teaches me how to be Christ-like. The church teaches me how it is that I'm supposed to live. The church teaches me what it is that I'm supposed to decide. I'm going to tell you right now, I probably do the most teaching that's done here, publicly. That's a blessing that I get. And the one who learns the most is the one who teaches. And so we learn together what it is to be Christ-like. We learn together what it is to follow where it is that Jesus walks and to live in the way that Jesus does. And it's a blessing to be able to learn those things. Because the church is designed to transform who I am. It's designed to transform my heart. It's designed to transform my belief. And so it goes beyond citizenship and it goes beyond family. To talk about who are you as a disciple. Do you believe that the church can change your life? Do you believe that the church can make you different? Do you believe that being with this group of people makes a difference in how you live when you're not with this group of people? Does this group of people help you to be what you need to be in all areas of your life? See, as Paul works through there, disciples grow to a place where they believe that the church becomes more and more fundamental to who they are, more and more a part of their identity, more and more a part of their action, more and more a part of who they are in terms of how they make decisions and how they feel and what they believe. In verse 21 it says, "In whom the whole structure being joined together grows into a holy temple in the Lord." See, now we all of a sudden have changed tracks and we talk about the fact that the church, disciples believe that the church is a holy temple. It is a place where God has designed, it's a place that God has designed for Himself. When we look in history at the temple and what it is that Paul references, we understand that God said, we're going to make a temple. David said, I want to build it. God said, no, Solomon will build it. And God laid out the plan and God laid out the designs. But He did that too with Moses at Sinai when He laid out the design for the tabernacle. That the church is structured by and built by God. It's not simply an institution that we look at that meets only something in me, but that the church is here because God has a plan to meet with us. And that the most transforming thing about what we do is that we learn to see God. Is that we learn that God has built this place. When Paul writes to the church in Corinth, he says that the church is the body of Christ and we are all members of it, and God has ordered us the way that He desires us. There are days I have to remind myself that you are all here because God put you here. But if God hadn't put you here, we'd have to have a talk. Right? No. We are put in this place because God has opened this opportunity for us, because God has designed this place for us to be. We have a function and a fit. We have a place to live out this design that God has. Peter will say that you are a temple, that God has built you into this structure to be a holy place, to be a place that tells the world that there is a God who is alive and who is working in the world. And the church becomes one of those places where we clearly see God at work. But more than that, it functions as a temple because in verse 22 it says, "In Him who also are being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit." That as God builds the church, He builds it to be a dwelling place. That God is here in this place. Where two or three are gathered together, there will I be with them also. That God has always designed that when His people are together, in twos and threes to worship in a variety of different settings, that God's promise is to be among us. That in the same way that God inhabited the temple in the Old Testament, the same way that God inhabited the tent of meeting with Moses or the tabernacle in the time of Samuel, pillar of cloud and pillar of fire, God is just as present today in the church. That God is just as present today when we gather together. And to believe that as disciples is to believe that this is a unique opportunity to meet with God and to be with God. And so the church becomes something fundamental. But it becomes something fundamental not just simply as a place to go and to learn, or simply as a place to go, but as a place to be changed, to be transformed, to be empowered, to live differently in the world. See, to proclaim that Jesus is Lord in the world requires that we have a place where we understand why Jesus is Lord, and a place that encourages us to proclaim that Jesus is Lord, and a place that allows us to heal when we get beat up because Jesus is Lord, and a place that we are responsible for. And sometimes that place is just a place that we go because we just know we're going to fit because we are citizens. And sometimes that place is a place we go because we have a desperate need for family. Sometimes that's a place that we go because we understand that in our personal struggle, this is where we can, in some ways, find answers, or at least have discussions, at least be able to talk about those things that are important in what it means to look like Jesus. That we are here because this is a place that God has built, and this is a place where God dwells. And this is a place that we come. And this is what the church is. It is a place where we together with God work out how to live out this declaration that Jesus is Lord in the world and in our families. In order to engage this kind of discipleship, I think there are some things that we need to be reminded of. And again, it's funny at a time when we are social distanced, and it's funny at a time when we are dealing with lots of other things, but it's also funny at a time when it's Sunday night and you are here and not someplace else. I will just go ahead and give you credit for that. That you look at a group at this particular point in time on a Sunday evening and go, I thank you for being the church, for showing us how to engage discipleship. Because disciples understand that presence is necessary, that you're here, that you're online, that you've taken this time to plug in to say it's important to be with these people in whatever fashion we can get together, in whatever fashion that we can. Then on Sunday evenings, you kind of proclaim that to the world. That we could have marked it done on Sunday mornings, but we're not going to. That the church is vital enough and the invitation of God is personal enough that we will come together to be with Him when we have opportunity and when we have a chance. That participation is necessary. Walker plays on a variety of teams. And you always got a kid or two that think they could just show up for the games. They don't have to practice at all. And you go, if you don't show up, we don't even know what you're about. And just simply presence is important. To understand that participation is vital. That not only do we show up to sit, that we show up to be and to invest and to give ourselves. That we show up to say, I have something to bring. In that same passage that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians about being the body of Christ, he says in that context that worship is when we all come together with our gifts and we lay them at each other's feet. That we each come with a song, that we each come with a prayer, that we each come with something to give. Because we come to this place to pour out as well as to soak up what it is that's given. That we come to this place to invest, that we come into this place to participate, to be involved in each other's lives. Because it's more than citizenship, it's family. It's more than just this group, it's personal. It's something that we give ourselves to. That we understand that practice makes progress. That's what we have come to believe. I grew up with an idea that practice made perfect. And there are a lot of things I've practiced and I'm still no good at. And that has become a lie. And one of the things that I've practiced for a long time is faith. And there are times I'm still not good at it. But practice makes progress. Jesus makes perfect. I get that at this point in time. But that the church is a place that we come to practice faith, that we come to practice what it is that we are dealing with, that we come to lay very practical things in the laps of each other and to share with each other. There are times I look at the prayer list at church and go, how can we cut that down to something that's manageable? What is all this stuff that's on here? But the reality is, most of those folks are on there at some point in time because they asked to be on there, because there was something that they brought to the church that was a physical need that they had. And we practice love, and sometimes patience, and sometimes kindness. We still try to make sure that it's a manageable list. I'm not going to give that up. But there are ways that we come and give ourselves to the church because we understand that we need involvement in each other's lives. That we share a message here to learn how to share a message in our workplace or in the marketplace or in our places of education, in our home places. That we learn here how it is that we can be what it is we're supposed to be in the world. See, disciples believe that the church makes a difference, that the church does something to us. But they also believe that the church does something in the world, that it leaves a footprint, that it leaves a fingerprint, that it leaves a mark that says God is still alive, and God is still working, and God is still active, and God is still calling people to Himself. God still makes a difference. And within the walls of this building, we understand what that difference is. I grew up with a teacher. I remember Reba Martin in church. And if you grew up like I did, you grew up saying, this is the church, right? And this is the steeple. Open the door and there's all the people. Sister Martin would not let us say that. Sister Martin would not let us. She said, now when you do that, you have to understand this. This is the church building, and this is the steeple, right? What was the difference? Open the door, and here's the people who are the church. And there is a distinction. But our four walls do make a definition for us. They are the place where the church meets. And within these four walls, we come together to glory in and to experience and to work through and to struggle with life and faith and God, because God is in this place and God still calls. And the world needs to understand that God is calling us into relationship with Him and into relationship with His people, and that God has something great in store for us, that there is a home in heaven, that there is a life in the sweet by and by, that there is something to look forward to, but also that there is a citizenship to be had here, and a family to be loved here, and a personal connection that we find in this life that changes everything. God is in this place, and God continues to call, and God is asking us to respond. If you are responding from home, then we ask you to email or to call. But if you're in this place tonight, we're going to ask that you come forward right now as we stand and as we sing. I need Thee every hour, most gracious Lord. No tender loves like Thine, and comes afford.
Lance. Good evening. Appreciate all of you being with us this evening, whether you're here in person or joining us online. Do we have any that would need to take communion this evening? Nobody? Okay. I just have two announcements. One I intended to make this morning, and we probably need to put this in the bulletin or make it again next week. We have new thermostats, and they are controlled by Shannon Harris's phone. So if you're not comfortable, please get in touch with Shannon. We don't want people making adjustments to the thermostats and overriding whatever Shannon has put in there. Everything is programmed to come on at the right time. So again, just if you need to be cooler or warmer, visit with Shannon. The other is that Ken Walling is in the hospital. We need to add him to our prayer list. He has an infection. He does not have COVID. And so just let's keep him in our prayers. Anything else I need to announce? Let's go to God in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, again, we thank you for being able to be here this evening. We're thankful for each one that's here. Father, be with us in the days ahead as we go back to our workplaces or back to school, and help us to show Jesus to all that we come in contact with. We ask that you'd be with all those who are suffering from the effects of the hurricane, be with all those who are dealing with the COVID virus or other illnesses. We ask especially that you be with our brother Ken. We pray for the right treatment for him, that he has a quick and complete recovery. Bless us and continue to be with us in all that we do. In Jesus' name, amen.